The shuttle doors hissed open over the landing pad of Brenner Station, and a thin layer of moon dust lifted into the air. Cadets from 12 different species stepped down the ramp in neat lines, their boots ringing against the metal. At the back of the line, a young human walked alone. He carried only a worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His name was Daniel Hart, and he was 24 years old, with quiet brown eyes and a half-smile that did not quite reach them. The Galactic Combat Academy had not accepted a human in over 2 centuries. Most species across the 9 sectors believed humans were too soft, too short-lived, too emotional to last in real training. The instructors at Brenner Station shared that belief. So did the cadets. As Daniel walked across the landing pad, dozens of eyes followed him. Some were curious. Most were pitying. A few were already laughing. Inside the main hall, the new arrivals were greeted by a tall figure in dark armor. He stood 7 feet high, with thick gray skin and 4 rows of sharp teeth visible behind his calm mouth. His name was Master Tyrant of the Volgon species, and he was the most feared instructor in the entire academy. He had broken cadets from 40 different worlds. He had never lost a single trainee to graduation without leaving deep scars, both inside and out. Tarek's slow yellow eyes moved across the line of new cadets. They stopped on Daniel. He stared for a long, heavy moment. Then his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "You," Tarek said, his voice low and grinding. "Human, step forward." Daniel set down his bag and stepped forward. "You will be my personal training subject," Tarek said. "Your name?" "Daniel Hart, sir." "Hart." Tarek tasted the word like it was something bitter. "Tell me, Hart, do you know what it means to be chosen by me?" "No, sir." "It means you will not graduate. It means I will use you to teach the others what failure looks like. Your species does not belong in the stars. By the time I am finished with you, even you will agree." A few cadets in the back row made small noises that might have been laughter. Daniel did not look at them. He kept his eyes on Tarek. "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "I am ready to learn." Tarek's smile widened. He liked breaking the proud ones. He would enjoy breaking the humble one even more. The first session began that same evening, far below the main halls of the academy in a place the cadets called the lower training pits. The pits were old. The walls were scorched from centuries of weapons drills. The gravity was set heavier than the surface, and the air smelled like rust and sweat. Tarek led Daniel down alone. The other cadets watched from the railings above. 12 hours, Tarek said. He gestured at the racks of training weapons along the walls. Combat drills. No rest. No water. No mercy. If you fall, I will make you start again from the beginning. Daniel nodded. He picked up a wooden practice staff. It was heavier than it looked. The first hour was bearable. The second hour, his arms began to shake. By the 4th hour, his palms were bleeding from the rough grain of the staff. Tarek called out moves and corrections in a flat, bored voice, the way a man might read a list. Whenever Daniel slowed, Tarek struck him sharply across the back or the legs with a metal rod. By the 7th hour, Daniel could no longer feel his hands. By the 9th, his vision was blurring at the edges. The cadets above had stopped laughing. Some of them had drifted away, unable to keep watching. Others stayed, their faces tight with discomfort. Tarek expected the human to fall by the 10th hour. He had seen species twice Daniel's mass collapse before then. But Daniel kept rising. Every time the staff hit the ground, he picked it up. Every time he stumbled, he caught himself on the wall and turned back to face his master. In the 11th hour, Daniel's knees gave out. He dropped hard onto the stone floor. Tarek walked over slowly, the metal rod tapping against his palm. "Get up," Tarek said. Daniel pressed his bleeding hands flat against the floor. He pushed. His arms shook. He rose halfway, fell, and rose again. "Get up, human." Daniel made it to one knee, then to both feet. He swayed. He lifted the staff. "Ready, sir," he whispered. Tarek stared at him. Something cold moved through the old instructor's chest, a feeling he did not recognize at first. He pushed it away. The 12th hour ended. Tarek lowered the rod. "Stop." Daniel let the staff fall. He stood there breathing in shallow, ragged pulls. His shirt was soaked through. Blood ran down his fingers and dripped onto the stone. "Tomorrow," Tarek said, "we begin again. Earlier. Harder." Daniel nodded. He bowed his head, slow and respectful. "Thank you for the lesson, Master Tarek," Daniel said. His voice was hoarse, but the words were clear. I will be better tomorrow. For the first time in 40 years of teaching, Master Tarek's smile faded completely. He stared at the bleeding human in front of him. The cold feeling in his chest came back. He could not name it, and he did not want to. He turned and walked out of the pit without another word. Above the railings, the watching cadets exchanged silent, troubled looks. None of them had ever seen a cadet thank Tarek for anything. Daniel limped to the wall and slid down against it. He closed his eyes. He smiled to himself, just a little, because he had survived the first day. That was enough. Outside, the twin moons of Brenner Station rose slowly over the dark training fields, and the long night began. 3 weeks into Daniel's training, the gravity chamber on the lower deck began to hum at a setting no instructor had ever used on a fresh cadet before. The dial read 3 times Earth normal. The chamber was meant for stress-testing armor plates, not living bodies. Master Tarek stood outside the thick glass window with his arms crossed, watching the human inside try to do simple push-ups against a force that wanted to flatten him into the floor. Daniel's elbows shook. His back arched. Sweat ran sideways across his forehead instead of falling down. He pushed up once, twice. On the third, his arms folded and his chest met the metal floor with a heavy slap. He breathed for a moment. Then he placed his palms flat again and started over. Tarek watched in silence. He had told himself many things in the past 3 weeks. He had told himself the human was lucky. He had told himself any species could survive 1 bad week. He had told himself the body would break soon, and after the body the spirit, and after the spirit the smile. The smile had not broken. Daniel still bowed at the end of every session. He still said thank you. He still arrived at every drill 10 minutes early. Tarek raised the gravity dial another notch. Inside the chamber, Daniel gasped. His arms gave out completely. He lay flat on the floor, breathing in short, painful pulls. He did not call out. He did not look at the window. After a long minute, he turned his head, placed one palm down, and began to drag himself toward the chamber's training rack. Tarek watched him crawl. He waited for the human to stop. The human did not stop. Outside the chamber, 2 senior cadets had paused at the railings above to watch. One was a droven female named Lyra, broad-shouldered and dark-scaled. The other was a small Ferocian male named Pell, whose copper feathers were still patchy from his first year. They looked down at the crawling human, then at each other. Neither spoke. They had stopped finding it funny weeks ago. That evening, in the dining hall, the spoiled rations finally reached a breaking point. The kitchen had been serving overripe protein blocks for 4 days running, and a young Tholan cadet bit into hers and gagged so hard she cried. 2 older cadets began to shout at the kitchen staff. The shouting turned into pushing. The pushing was about to turn into something worse. Daniel set down his tray. He walked between the 2 groups quietly. He did not raise his voice. "Excuse me," he said. "Could I see the duty officer? Just to ask a question." The shouting stopped. The cadets stared at him. The kitchen staff stared at him. The duty officer, an irritated old Volgon, came out from the back room. "What?" the officer snapped. Daniel held up the protein block. "Sir, I think the cooling unit on storage row 4 might be broken. The blocks taste fermented. If we replace just that row, the rest of the supply should still be safe." The officer blinked. He took the block, sniffed it, and made a face. He sent 2 staff members down to check storage row 4. 20 minutes later, the row was confirmed broken, the bad rations were pulled, and fresh ones were brought up from the deeper freezer. The cadets ate in silence. Several of them watched Daniel across the hall. Lyra slid into the seat across from him with her tray. "You did not raise your voice." "No need," Daniel said. "They would have listened to you faster if you had." "Maybe. But then tomorrow they would not listen at all." Lyra studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and started eating. The next assignment came 2 days later. Tarek announced it in front of the full class. Daniel would spend 10 days alone on the frozen training moon that orbited Brenner Station. No rations. No shelter. Only a knife and a thermal blanket. Several cadets gasped. The frozen moon was used for advanced survival exercises, and even those lasted 3 days at most. 10 days with no food was a sentence, not a lesson. Daniel saluted and went to pack. He did not return on day 10. Tarek told himself he did not care. He told himself the human had finally failed. He told himself this was the result he had wanted from the start. He sat in his office that night and stared at the dark window, and he did not eat his evening meal. On the morning of day 11, the watchtower spotted a small figure crossing the ice flats toward the landing pad. The figure was thin and bent. It walked slowly. It carried something wrapped in a thermal blanket. Daniel reached the inner gate and collapsed onto one knee. The medics rushed forward. He waved them off with a frostbitten hand and held up the blanket bundle first. "Please," he whispered. "She needs help more than I do." Inside the blanket was a small ice fox, its legs shattered, its breathing shallow. Daniel had carried the animal for 3 days across the frozen flats. Tyrant arrived at the gate just as the medics took the fox. He stared at the bundle, then at the kneeling human, then at the bundle again. The cold feeling in his chest came back, sharper this time. "Drop the animal, Hart," Tyrant said. His voice was harder than he meant it to be. "Cadets do not waste medical resources on wild creatures." Daniel looked up at him. His lips were cracked. His eyes were calm. "I am sorry, sir," he said quietly. "I cannot." Tarek's hand moved before he thought about it. The back of his armored glove struck Daniel across the face. The young man fell sideways onto the frost. The watching cadets at the gate went silent. Daniel sat up slowly. He touched his split lip. He did not look angry. He looked tired. "Is the lesson over, sir?" he asked. "I would like to take her to the medics." Tyrant did not answer. He could not. He watched the human stand, lift the blanket bundle again, and limp past him into the warmth of the academy. A small wooden carving appeared on the corner of Daniel's bunk one morning, left there by someone who had not signed a name. It was a clumsy little figure of an ice fox, no bigger than a thumb, whittled from a piece of training staff. Daniel held it in his palm for a long moment and smiled. He set it on his shelf next to his folded uniform. 3 days later, a second carving appeared. Then a third, this one shaped like a small bird. By the end of the week, his shelf held 7 carvings, and he still did not know who was leaving them. The cadets had stopped pitying Daniel. Something else had taken the pity's place, and it was harder to name. They watched him move through the halls. They asked him for help with their drills. They sat near him in the dining hall, even when there were better seats elsewhere. None of them said the word out loud, but it was there in the way they straightened up when he entered a room. They had begun to follow him. When a junior class was punished unfairly for a broken window, Daniel volunteered to take half their cleaning hours himself. When the Ferocian cadet Pell broke down crying in the corner of the library after failing his second exam, Daniel sat beside him on the cold floor for the entire night and did not say a single word. He only stayed there until morning, until Pell wiped his face and stood up and went to class with his head lifted. Master Tarek heard about all of it. The surveillance grid in the academy missed nothing. He sat in his office in the evenings and watched the recordings on a small screen, and his 4 hands rested on his knees, and he did not move for hours. The cold feeling in his chest had a name now. He had finally let himself say it. The name was shame. He hated it. He pushed it down with everything he had, and he replaced it with something easier. Anger. The human was making him weak. The human was making the academy weak. The cadets were forgetting their place. Discipline was loosening. Tarek told himself these things over and over, and he believed them less each day. He decided to end it. Publicly. Completely. The challenge was posted on the central board of the academy on a Thursday morning. A formal sparring match between Master Tarek of the Volgon species and Cadet Daniel Hart of the human species. Open arena. Full broadcast across all 9 sector academies. 3 days from posting. The cadets read the notice in silence. Lyra read it twice. Pell read it and walked away looking sick. Daniel read it last. He nodded once, folded the announcement neatly, and went back to his drills. The arena on the morning of the match was packed. Every cadet on Brenner Station had crowded into the stands, and 100 cameras hovered overhead, broadcasting the fight to academies on 12 different worlds. Commander Ressa, the elderly Tholan who ran the station, sat in her balcony with her thin hands folded and her eyes troubled. Tarek entered first. He wore his full combat armor, polished to a dark shine. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. Daniel entered second. He wore the simple training uniform he was assigned. He bowed to Tarek across the ring. Then he raised his hands. The bell rang. Tarek closed the distance in 2 long strides. His first strike caught Daniel under the ribs. There was a sharp, wet sound. Daniel staggered sideways, his arm wrapped tight around his middle. 2 ribs, at least, Maybe 3. The crowd made a soft, collective noise. Daniel straightened. He raised his hands again. Tarek struck a second time. Daniel slipped sideways at the last moment, and the blow that should have ended the fight only grazed his shoulder. He countered, not with a punch, but with a controlled push that turned Tarek's weight against him. Tarek caught himself easily, but the cadets in the stands sat up. The human was not trying to win. He was sparring the way a senior cadet spars with a younger one in a training drill. Cleanly, carefully, almost gently. Every move he made was correct, controlled, and entirely without anger. He was showing Tarek something the master had not expected to see. He was showing him respect. Tarek felt the cold feeling in his chest crack wide open. He attacked harder, faster, with everything he had spent 40 years building. He landed strike after strike. Daniel went down and rose again. Down and rose again. Each time he stood, his bow was a little shallower because his ribs would not let him bend. But he stood, and he never struck back with hatred. He never even tried. By the 10th minute, the crowd had gone completely silent. Even the broadcasters had stopped speaking. There was only the sound of Tarek's heavy breathing and the soft scrape of Daniel's boots on the arena floor. Tarek finally landed the finishing blow, a full-strength armored elbow to the side of Daniel's head. The young man dropped like a cut rope. For 3 long seconds, he did not move. Then he placed one shaking palm flat on the floor. He pushed up. He rose to one knee, to both feet. He swayed badly, and a thin line of blood ran from his ear down to his jaw. He looked at Tarek through one eye that was already swelling shut. He smiled. He bowed. "Thank you, Master," Daniel whispered. The microphones caught it. The whole galaxy heard it. Good lesson. Then his legs folded under him, and he sat down hard on the arena floor, still smiling. The arena erupted. Cadets stood. Cadets shouted. Cadets pounded the railings with their fists, calling Daniel's name over and over. Tarek was the official winner. The horn sounded. His arm was raised by the referee. But as he walked out of the arena, his armored boots felt heavier than they ever had in his life. He passed Commander Ress's balcony without looking up. In his quarters, alone, Master Tarek of the Volgon species sat down on the edge of his bunk and stared at his own 4 hands. They were shaking. He could not stop them. He stared at them for a very long time. By the end of the next morning, recordings of the sparring match had spread to every corner of the galactic networks. News stations on 12 worlds played the final 10 seconds on a loop. The image of a battered human bowing to the master who had just broken him was everywhere. It played on dining hall screens. It played on transit pads. It played in the back of cargo bars where pilots argued over their drinks. The clip was watched, paused, replayed, and watched again. The pundits could not agree on what they had seen. Some called Daniel a fool. They said he should have struck back. They said any other species would have. But many more, far more than the network owners had expected, used a word they had never used about a human before. Noble. The word spread faster than the clip. It moved from broadcast to broadcast, from cadet to cadet, from species to species. Within 3 days, transfer requests began arriving at Brenner Station from rival academies in 4 different sectors. Young cadets wanted to study at the place that had produced the bowing human. They wanted to be taught by the same instructors who had shaped him. The administrators in Commander Ress's office worked around the clock just to sort the requests. Master Tarek did not watch the clip. He did not need to. He had been there. He had felt the human's calm, careful hands trying to teach him something with every block and counter. He had felt it for 10 full minutes, and now he could not unfeel it. He moved through the next week of training drills like a man walking through a dream he could not wake from. The cadets noticed. He no longer raised his voice. He no longer struck them with the metal rod. He gave correct, dry instruction and stepped back, and his yellow eyes drifted constantly toward the figure of the recovering human at the edge of the training field. Daniel was on light duty. The medics had wrapped his ribs. His left eye was still swollen. He could not lift more than 10 kilograms for at least another week. But he attended every class. He took notes. He stretched carefully through the morning drills and watched the sparring matches with quiet attention. Tarek watched him watch. On the 7th morning after the match, Tarek made a decision he had been avoiding for days. He posted a new assignment for Cadet Hart on the central board. A deep space survival exercise. 1 small training shuttle. A standard course out to the edge of the Corlani fringe and back. 5 days, alone in the void, with only basic life support and emergency rations. The Korlani Fringe was known for pirate activity. It was a sector instructors usually avoided when assigning solo cadets. Tarek told himself the wilderness would do what training could not. He told himself this was the final lesson. He told himself many things. He believed almost none of them. Daniel read the assignment without surprise. He nodded once and went to prepare. On the morning of departure, the launch bay was quieter than usual. A small group of cadets had gathered to see Daniel off. Lyra stood at the front with her arms crossed. Pell stood behind her, his copper feathers fluffed up against the cold of the bay. Several others Daniel did not even know by name had come too. Daniel saluted them and smiled. "Bring back stories," Lyra said gruffly. "I will try." He lifted his small kit bag. He turned toward the shuttle ramp. Then he stopped, set the bag down, and walked across the bay in the other direction. Tarek was watching from the upper observation walkway. He saw the human change course. He saw him climb the metal stairs. He stood up from the railing he had been leaning on and turned to face him. Daniel stopped 2 paces away. He bowed, slow and full. "Master Tarek," he said, "I wanted to thank you before I left." Tarek did not answer. He could not. "I know I have not been an easy student," Daniel went on. His voice was quiet and clear. "I know you have pushed me harder than the others. I want you to know that I understand why. No instructor has ever cared enough about a cadet to push him this far. The hard lessons have made me stronger than I would have been anywhere else. I am very grateful, sir. I will not forget what you have given me." He bowed again. Then he turned and walked back down the metal stairs. Tarek stood frozen on the walkway. His 4 hands rested on the railing. His yellow eyes followed the small figure crossing the bay, picking up the kit bag, climbing the shuttle ramp, disappearing inside. The shuttle hatch sealed. The launch lights cycled green. The engines fired. The small ship lifted, turned, and slipped out of the open bay into the black. Tarek did not move for a long time after it was gone. The cold feeling in his chest was not cold anymore. It was hot, and it was rising, and it filled his throat until he could not swallow. He understood now. He understood with terrible, total clarity what he had done. There had never been any hatred in the human. There had never been any plot, or any plan, or any pride. Daniel Hart had walked into Brenner Station as a young man who simply wanted to learn from the hardest teacher he could find. He had taken every blow, every cruel order, every sleepless night, and he had taken them as gifts. He had thanked his master. He had bowed. He had carried a wounded fox through a frozen waste because he had a kind heart, and he had bowed in the arena because he had been trying to show the master something the master had not been ready to see. Tarek had spent months trying to break a young man who admired him. He sat down slowly on the walkway, his armored back against the railing. His 4 hands covered his face. The launch bay alarm began to wail. Tarek looked up sharply. Red lights spun across the ceiling. Voices crackled in his earpiece. A distress signal had been picked up at the edge of the Korlani Fringe. A human voice, fragmented, calling for help. Tarek was on his feet before the alarm finished its first cycle. The command center filled with shouting voices and overlapping reports. Officers ran between consoles. Holographic charts bloomed in the air, showing the wide black gulf of the Korlani Fringe and a single small marker blinking red in the middle of it. The marker was Daniel's training shuttle. Around it, 3 larger markers had appeared. Pirate vessels. Korlani raiders, moving in fast. A second shuttle marker blinked just beside Daniel's, smaller and weaker. A junior cadet had been assigned to a separate solo exercise on the same flight path that morning. A scheduling error. A young Dolan female, 15 standard years old, on her first deep space drill. The fragmented transmission played again on the central speaker. "This is Cadet Hart. Junior cadet on board with me. Pirates boarding. Repeat, hostiles boarding. I have her in the rear compartment. I am holding the corridor." Then static. Then a single line, calm and almost quiet. "Whoever comes, please hurry. She is very young." The transmission cut. Master Tarek pushed through the officers around the console. His armor scraped against a chair as he moved. Commander Ressa stood at the central display, her thin gray hands folded behind her back, her old eyes sharp. "Commander," Tarek said, "I am taking the fast cruiser." "Master Tarek, the protocols require a full assessment before any rescue mission to the Fringe." The Korlani sector is outside our patrol agreement. We must contact the sector command first and request authorization. That will take 6 hours at minimum. In 6 hours, he will be dead. Master Tarek, I cannot authorize a breach of protocol. Tarek looked at her for a long moment. His 4 rows of teeth were hidden behind a closed mouth. His yellow eyes were not the eyes of the cruel instructor anymore. They were the eyes of a man who had already lost something, and who refused to lose it twice. Then do not authorize it, Commander, he said quietly. I will resign on my way to the bay. He turned and walked out of the command center. Commander Ressa watched him go. She did not call after him. She did not order him stopped. She turned to her senior officer and said, very softly, begin the authorization request anyway. Speed it up however you can. In the launch bay, Tarek did not bother taking off his uniform jacket. He climbed straight into the fast cruiser, an old Volgan attack vessel kept ready for emergency drills. He began the launch sequence. He was not alone for long. Lyra arrived first, half-dressed in her flight suit, her dark scales bristling. Pel came next, his small copper-feathered shoulders trembling, his hands tight around an unloaded sidearm he was not yet certified to carry. 4 more senior cadets followed. None of them had been ordered. None of them asked permission. They strapped into the cruiser's secondary seats and looked at Tarek and waited. Tarek looked back at them. He nodded once. Hold tight, he said. The cruiser tore out of the bay at maximum acceleration. The journey took 9 hours. Tarek did not sleep. He sat at the helm with his 4 hands on the controls and the dark of the void streaming past the front viewports. The cadets behind him were quiet. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engines and the slow, regular pulse of the navigation system. In those 9 hours, Tarek did not think about regulations. He did not think about his career. He thought about a young man with bleeding palms saying thank you for the lesson. He thought about a frostbitten figure crossing the ice with a wounded fox in his arms. He thought about a human bowing in an arena with blood running down his face. He thought about every cruel order he had given, every harsh word, every blow. He pushed the cruiser harder. On the 8th hour, Lyra came up to the front and stood quietly behind his chair. She did not speak. She just stood there. He is alive, Tarek said. He did not know if he was telling her or himself. He has to be. He is, Lyra said. He has to be. The cruiser dropped out of high acceleration on the 9th hour. The console pinged. The Korlani raiders had pulled back. The pirate vessels were drifting at the edge of the system, 2 of them venting atmosphere, 1 of them simply dark and dead. The training shuttle was tumbling slowly in the black, its hull scarred but intact. Tarek brought the cruiser alongside the shuttle and locked the boarding clamp. The cadets armed up. They moved through the airlock in tight formation. Tarek led them. The shuttle was filled with smoke. Korlani bodies lay in the corridor. 3 of them. Their armor was scored with plasma burns, their helmets open. They had been killed at close range with the shuttle's old emergency sidearm. The boarding team moved quickly. They reached the rear compartment first. The door was sealed from the inside. Lyra pried it open with her shoulder. The young Dolan cadet sat in the back, wide-eyed, alive, completely unhurt. She was holding a thermal blanket around herself with both small hands. He told me to stay quiet, she whispered. He said I should not open the door, no matter what I heard. Pel took her gently by the arm and led her toward the cruiser. Tarek turned back to the corridor. Daniel was slumped against the wall on the far side of the sealed door. The old emergency sidearm rested in his lap. His right hand was still on the grip, even though he no longer had the strength to lift it. His training uniform was burned through in 3 places. 3 plasma rounds. 2 in the chest. 1 low in the side. His eyes were half open. His head was tilted back against the metal. His breathing was shallow and slow, and there were long, terrible pauses between each breath. Tarek crossed the corridor in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside him. Hart, he said. His voice cracked on the word. Hart. Daniel. It was the first time he had ever used the human's first name. Daniel's half-open eyes drifted toward him. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. You came, Daniel whispered. I came. I am here. Stay with me. Stay with me, Daniel, please. Tarek had never said please to anyone in his entire life. He gathered the human up in his 4 armored arms, as gently as he had ever held anything, and he carried him back through the smoke toward the cruiser, and he did not let go. The infirmary lights at Brenner Station burned low and steady through the long hours of that first night. Behind a thin glass partition, 3 medics worked over the still figure on the central table. Their hands moved in quick, practiced patterns, sealing the burns, threading the new lung tissue, restarting the slow heart whenever it tried to give up. Outside the glass, in the small waiting alcove, Master Tyrant of the Volgon species sat on a metal bench and did not move. He sat there for 9 hours, then for 12, then for 20. The cadets came and went in shifts, bringing him water he did not drink and food he did not touch. Lyra tried once to make him sleep. He looked at her with eyes that were not the eyes of a master, only the eyes of a tired old being, and she stopped trying. She sat down beside him and waited with him. The medics came out on the second morning. Their lead surgeon, an old droven female with steady hands, spoke quietly to Tarek. Daniel would live. The damage had been severe. There would be scars on the chest, on the side, on the lung. He would carry them for the rest of his life. But he would live. Tarek closed his eyes. He did not weep, because Volgans do not weep, but he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against his folded 4 hands, and he stayed that way for a very long time. Daniel woke on the 3rd day. The room was quiet. The lights were soft. He turned his head slowly on the pillow. The first thing he saw was the figure of Master Tarek sitting beside his bed, unwashed, unmoving, eyes hollow. The master had not left the chair in 3 days. His armor was still scuffed from the boarding action. His 4 hands rested loosely in his lap. "Master," Daniel whispered. His voice was thin and dry. Tarek's head snapped up. He leaned forward. "Heart, you are awake. Do not try to speak. Drink first. Here." He held the small water cup to Daniel's lips with hands that shook. Daniel drank a little. He smiled. The smile was small and tired, but it was real. Tarek set the cup down. He opened his mouth to speak. He closed it again. The words he had been turning over in his mind for 3 days had all left him at once. He had never apologized to a living being in his entire 40-year career. He did not know how the words were supposed to begin. Daniel saw him struggle. He reached out one bandaged hand and rested it lightly on the edge of Tarek's armored sleeve. "Master," Daniel said softly, "there is nothing to forgive." "Daniel, every hard day made me strong enough. The girl is alive because of every hour you put me through. That is all that ever mattered. Truly, that is all." Tarek's broad gray shoulders began to shake. He bowed his head. His 4 hands closed slowly around the bandaged human hand on his sleeve, and he held it as if it were the most fragile thing he had ever touched. He stayed that way for a long time. Daniel did not pull his hand away. The change in Tarek did not come all at once. It came in small, quiet steps over the weeks that followed. He resigned from his position as senior instructor and submitted his transfer to Commander Ressa within the month. He requested the lowest possible rank. He asked only to be allowed to keep teaching and to keep learning beside the human who had survived him. Commander Ressa read the request twice. Then she signed it without a word. The academy changed with him. The metal rod was gone from the lower training pits. The gravity chambers were no longer set above safe limits. The cruel public corrections faded out of the training schedule. The cadets did not become softer. They became something stronger and quieter and more loyal. The transfer requests from rival academies kept coming in. Daniel healed slowly. He was back on light drills within 2 months and full drills within 4. He carried the scars under his uniform. He never spoke of them. But the carvings on his shelf had grown to 15 now, and he knew at last which cadets had been leaving them, and he had thanked each one in turn. 6 months after the rescue, Daniel graduated first in his class. He was the first human ever to do so at Brenner Station. The graduation hall was packed beyond capacity. Cadets stood along the walls. Commanders from rival academies attended in person. The broadcast was watched on 12 worlds. When Daniel was called to the stage, he bowed first to Commander Ressa, then to the line of senior instructors, then to the assembled cadets. He spoke briefly. He thanked the academy. He thanked the medics. He thanked the friends who had stood by him. Then a young first-year cadet near the front raised her small hand. She was a Tholan, no older than the girl from the rescue. She asked the question every new cadet wanted to ask. "Cadet Hart, what made the difference? What made you the cadet you became?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked out across the hall. His eyes found a single figure standing at the very back, near the far doors. A tall Volgan in plain instructor's clothes, no armor, for hands folded in front of him, watching quietly. There was a master, Daniel said. He pushed me harder than anyone else ever could, harder than I thought I could survive. For a long time, I did not understand why. Then I did. The hardest lessons in life come from the people who care the most. He was the best teacher I have ever had. Everything I am, I owe to him. At the back of the hall, Tarek's 4 rows of teeth were hidden behind a quiet, grateful smile. He did not move. He only listened. His old yellow eyes were wet. The cadets applauded for a long time. The next morning, in the empty central arena, before the rest of the academy had risen, 2 figures met to spar. The early light came in pale through the high windows. There was no audience. There were no broadcast cameras. There was only a tall gray master in plain clothes and a young human in a simple training uniform, bowing to each other across the ring, then raising their hands and beginning the slow, patient drills of basic combat. They sparred cleanly. They sparred carefully. They corrected each other gently when one of them missed a step. A master and a student, finally training the way it was always meant to be.